There is Lee. He's been shot.
Dorothy began harboring suspicions that the so-called open and shut case against Lee Harvey Oswald was not so open and shut.
She looked at the one person that she could investigate and where she would find the truth, and who was that? It was Jack Ruby.
She told me she was going to get a gun because her life was being threatened.
She said if the wrong people knew what I know, it would cost me my life.
Dorothy Mae Kilgallen was born on July 3, 1913, to James and Mae Kilgallen in Chicago, Illinois. Her father, James, was a newspaper reporter. In 1920, he took a job with the International News Service in New York City. The family settled in Brooklyn, where Dorothy Kilgallen attended Erasmus Hall High School, graduating in 1932. She then studied at the College of New Rochelle. After a year, she dropped out to take a job as a reporter at the New York Evening Journal. The newspaper was owned by the Hearst Corporation, who was also the parent company to her father's employer. Dorothy Kilgallen wasted no time making a name for herself in the news business.
Her first big break was her participation in a race around the world in 38 days, and in each of those days, Dorothy had her picture. She was in the headlines. So when Dorothy came back, Dorothy was famous.
She developed her own style and forcefully went into this man's world. Her main reportage was crime and heavy-duty investigation.
In 1938, Dorothy got her own byline, but instead of the crime beat, Kilgallen covered Broadway for the Journal-American.
Then they gave her this column, which started out locally and then became nationwide, and called The Voice of Broadway. Mainly it dealt with theatrical people in New York.
In 1940, Kilgallen married Broadway actor Richard Colmar and would go on to have 3 children, Richard Jr., Jill, and Carrie. The couple soon broke into radio, hosting their own morning talk show called Breakfast with Dorothy and Dick.
They were the original Mr. and Mrs. radio show, and they broadcast from their house in their night clothes.
In 1950, Dorothy Kilgallen became a regular panelist on the TV game show What's My Line? The show was a massive success and made her a household name.
What's my line?
Would you say,
Mr.
Cohen, that charitable work was just part of what you did?
Yes.
Do you have something else to do that's uplifting?
Yes.
Do you have occasion to talk to people in your work?
Yes.
Is that an important part of it?
Yes.
And do you advise or exhort them in any way?
Yes.
Are you any type of a preacher?
Yes.
Well, are you the Reverend?
Yes.
Mr. Cohen?
That's absolutely right.
Would you say that you deal with more with one? Would this be purchased at a lingerie shop?
Yes. Yes. See, I learn things every day. Go on, Mr. Arthur.
Is it worn below the shoulders?
Yes.
And it's above the hemline?
Yes. You're speaking of the standard hemline, of course.
Is it ever worn below the belt line?
Yes.
Whatever it is, you go ahead and get it.
She probably guessed what people's line was, what their job was, more often than anyone on the pen line.
That makes it 5 down and 5 to go. Kilgallen.
Do you have anything to do with the numbers coming up on the scoreboard every time the Dodgers get a home run?
Actually, I think you hit it right on the head.
Despite her television success, Kilgallen maintained focus on her career in the newspaper business. Her columns and radio broadcasts were known for mixing entertainment with serious issues. In 1954, Kilgallen got the chance to cover a high-profile criminal trial.
The first case that she covered seriously, for which she continues to be known, is the Sam Shepard murder case in Ohio in 1954. She put everything on hold and went to Cleveland to cover the trial.
Dr. Sam Shepard was tried for the gruesome stabbing murder of his wife, Marilyn.
He hasn't testified yet at his own trial. It's expected that he will.
Kilgallen was convinced that the good doctor was clean. Too bad for Shepard, Dorothy wasn't on the jury.
I don't think she could think of a motive that satisfied her. She was sure that he was innocent, and she was sure that the jury would agree with her, alas, they finally did not.
Shepard was thrown in the clink.
Dorothy Kilgallen maintained the belief that Shepard was innocent, and his exoneration 12 years later proved she was right.
She also covered the Lindbergh baby kidnapping case, the Lenny Bruce First Amendment case. The New York Post called her the most powerful female voice in America.
From the outside, it appeared Dorothy Kilgallen had it all: a serious career in journalism, a family, wealth, and celebrity status. Unfortunately, in time, her marriage to Richard Colmar began to fall apart. However, the couple never divorced and remained married only for the sake of appearances.
Well, that marriage was always a little fishy, most people felt, because Dick had a roving eye. So here was Dick, getting drunk and squeezing somebody on the dance floor, and Dorothy just acted as though it never happened.
I asked her why she didn't divorce Richard, and she said she could never do that to Richard. Richard had been too kind to her. And I think that had something to do with Carrie.
Did she ever tell you that Richard Colmar was not the father of Carrie?
Yes, she did.
Did she explain anything about it?
She said that Johnny Ray was the father of her youngest child.
Did you notice a resemblance between Johnny Ray and
I
Carrie?
saw a strong resemblance. Yes.
So Dick finally blew up and put his foot down. He threatened to kill Johnny. He threw him out of their house and told Dorothy that she was never to see him again. Johnny was scared, and he wouldn't take Dorothy's calls. She was frantic, and she fell apart to the point where she was hospitalized.
Johnny would have to die before she could stop loving him, and that was pretty strong.
Despite trouble in her family life, Kilgallen's public profile was at its peak in the early 1960s. Her credibility as a reporter was rock solid, and she maintained her status in the New York celebrity scene. She had even met President John F. Kennedy on several occasions, including one visit to the White House, where she recalled he was especially warm to her youngest son, Kerry. When Kennedy was assassinated on November 22, 1963, Dorothy Kilgallen was devastated. 2 days later, when alleged assassin Lee Harvey Oswald was killed in the Dallas police station, her suspicions grew. On November 29th, she wrote a column urging President Johnson to satisfy the public's uneasy mind about this peculiar assassination of the assassin, or he will start his term in office by making a dire political mistake. She went on to say, "The case is closed, is it? Well, I'd like to know how, in a big, smart town like Dallas, a man like Jack Ruby, owner of a striptease honky-tonk, can stroll in and out of police headquarters as if it was at a health club, at a time when a small army of law enforcers is keeping a tight security guard on Oswald." Dorothy Kilgallen began to focus on Oswald's killer, Jacob Rubenstein, also known as Jack Ruby, a Dallas nightclub owner with connections to the mafia and the Dallas police.
So what did Dorothy do? Well, she started looking into the facts. And I will tell you right now, she was not interested in Lee Harvey Oswald. She looked at the one person that she could investigate and where she would find the truth, and who was that? It was Jack Ruby.
Alone amongst the mainstream press reporters, Dorothy began harboring suspicions that the so-called open and shut case against Lee Harvey Oswald was not so open and shut.
Dorothy was finding dissident witnesses, deposing them, publishing their testimony.
Kilgallen traveled to Dallas to cover Jack Ruby's trial.
First thing she did was ingratiate herself with Melvin Belli, Joe Tonahill, and the defense team. She had dinner with Belli and Tonahill. She did as much as she could to learn everything from them.
She told me that she had had a contact with a friend of Jack's from San Francisco. I believe it was an opera singer that he was very fond of, and she wanted to pass along a message to him. And I told Jack that, and he said, "Yeah, I'd like to talk with her." And I told the 4 guards, Jack had a bodyguard shield around him of 4 deputy sheriff sitting there behind him, you know, and everywhere he went. And I told them that she wanted to ask Jack some questions and speak with him at recess, and that he had agreed to it, and they said, okay. So when the judge declared the noon recess, Jack went over and spoke with her. It was in the courtroom right behind his chair where he was sitting. There was a rail there, and he got up and went to she was on the other side of the rail, Jack was on this side, and they had a little conversation. I think the press had already left the courtroom at that time. He wasn't uttering nonsense because this interview with her was a very significant point in his classless life, you know, and I think he enjoyed it very much and cooperated with her in every way that he could, and told her the truth as he understood it.
Now you're probably wondering, what did Ruby tell her? I wish I could tell you. Because when Dorothy Kilgallen died, her files, her documents, everything disappeared. They've never been found. We don't know what he told her. The only thing we do know is shortly thereafter, she didn't go to Washington, D.C. to look into the government or anything. She didn't stay in Dallas looking into LBJ. She didn't go to Cuba looking at the Cubans or Russia. Where'd she go? She went to New Orleans.
Did Dorothy say that when she traveled with you in the future, she wanted to stay in a separate hotel?
She said that when we were in New Orleans. She called me, and I went there to do her hair so she'd look better in the pictures that were being taken of her. And I'd done her hair and left the hotel and was fooling around town. And she called me and she said, I want you to leave immediately. I don't want you to tell anyone you were ever here with me. I don't want anyone to know that you were ever here with me. And don't ask me any more questions. And I got on the plane and flew back to New York.
On August 9, 1964, Kilgallen shocked the nation by publishing Jack Ruby's testimony to the Warren Commission before it was released to the public.
She printed on the front page of the Journal American before the president received it. And therein lies the tale. From then on, we were stalked.
Who's we?
Mark, myself, our phones were tapped. They were trying to find out where she got her information from.
All our phones were tapped because they were trying to figure out how she had gotten them.
The FBI immediately undertook an investigation to find out how Dorothy Kilgallen had obtained Ruby's testimony. She refused to reveal her source to the FBI agents who interviewed her, saying she would die rather than reveal his identity. Kilgallen later quipped about the interview in a column. The FBI might be more profitably employed in probing the facts of the case rather than how I got them, which does seem a waste of time to me. When the Warren Report was released, Dorothy Kilgallen remained a vocal critic of the Oswald lone assassin conclusion. She told those close to her that she was working on a book that would reveal what she learned in her interview with Jack Ruby and her subsequent trips to New Orleans.
She would say, I'm going to New Orleans. I got to meet a man there. It's all very cloak and daggerish.
I wondered a lot about this so-called folder that she had. She brought it into the dressing room at What's My Line and said, here's all the stuff that I've learned, and I'm working on it. Nobody can have a look at it.
And she was carrying around a big packet of papers with her that she said pertained to the assassination. She said that this would be the case of a lifetime, a story of a lifetime, that she would prove who assassinated the president.
She never quit. She dug up something. She dug up something about the assassination of President Kennedy that somebody didn't want her to know, because she even told us of her own volition. She said, I used to share things with you guys, and she said, but after I have found out now what I know, she said, if the wrong people knew what I know, it would cost me my life. And she was dead about 9 months later.
Kilgallen seemed bent on following the organized crime angle of the case. It was a world she was very familiar with as a New York socialite and journalist. She even had a mob connection of her own.
I understand that Dorothy had some acquaintance with Frank Costello.
Yes, he gave her a diamond cross, and she said, I can't wear this diamond cross. It was huge. So we broke it up and made it into earrings. At a little Italian restaurant downtown, We went down there for dinner one night, and he was there, and he bought us drinks, and he was very nice to us. She later told me who he was. I did not know who he was.
Now, this man was supposedly a major organized criminal, and yet he was not pulling a gun on you or anything like that?
No. We were probably safer with him that night than any place else we would be.
Did Dorothy ever tell you if she was pumping Mr. Costello for details about...
She would never have told me that. Never.
So you don't know if Mr. Costello gave her information?
Yeah, I'm sure he did. But she would never tell me that she was trying to get something out of him. I'm not sure that we weren't there to see him that night, because it was really off the path for her.
To go to an Italian restaurant?
Well, down in Little Italy, yes.
Author Mark Shaw believes Kilgallen may have been investigating New Orleans mafia boss Carlos Marcello, who had a clear motive for revenge against the Kennedy family.
She went to New Orleans because Carlos Marcello, one of the most dangerous mafioso in the country, the one with the greatest motive to have killed Jack Kennedy so Bobby Kennedy was powerless, which is exactly what happened. That's where he was. But what she was able to do, and I think I've proven this in my previous books, especially in this new one, she connected Lee Harvey Oswald, Jack Ruby, and Carlos Marcello.
Arkansas Senator John McClellan established a committee to investigate labor racketeering and organized crime. McClellan's chief counsel was 33-year-old Robert Kennedy. On March 24, 1959, Marcello appeared before the committee. Like his last appearance before lawmakers, he was not forthcoming.
Then one of the senators on the committee said, "How in the name of God have you been allowed to remain in this country 8 years after you were officially deported?" And Marcello's response was, "I really wouldn't know, sir. I don't know anything about that." Bobby Kennedy then said to his associates, "Someday I'm going to get rid of that guy."
When John F. Kennedy became president in 1961, he installed his younger brother, Robert, as Attorney General. One of Bobby Kennedy's first targets was Carlos Marcello.
The law was such that a candidate for deportation could file an unlimited number of motions to stay deportation. Marcello obviously had almost unlimited economic resources.
While his lawyers worked the legal system, Marcello paid regular visits to the Immigration and Naturalization Service in order to maintain his resident alien status.
Kennedy had federal agents kidnap Marcello when Marcello went to report to the Immigration and Naturalization Service office in New Orleans. They took him and put him on a plane and dropped him off in Guatemala.
After 3 days in the wilderness, Marcello made it to civilization. By methods that remain unclear, Marcello sneaked back into the U.S. 2 months later. Courts upheld the legality of Marcello's deportation, and Kennedy increased his efforts to get the mobster out of the country. Marcello seethed under the heat of Bobby Kennedy's attention. Ed Becker, a businessman with ties to Marcello, said that in 1962, the usually discreet boss let it slip that he had murder on his mind.
Well, I said, geez, you kill Bobby Kennedy, you'll have a whole United States government on you, Who says they're going to kill him? He says, but what you do, you cut off with the head, the tail dies.
In 1965, Kilgallen had begun a romantic affair with a younger journalist from Ohio named Ron Pataki.
Ron Pataki was a journalist in the Midwest. Much younger than Dorothy, 22 years younger, and he kind of latched on to her right as she was investigating the JFK assassination. Perhaps by accident, perhaps by not. They had a torrid love affair, according to her.
Once he sent her some cut-out valentines, and they all strung apart, which she showed me.
Meanwhile, Kilgallen began to experience threats and intimidation, allegedly to scare her from revealing her findings.
She told me that this is a couple of weeks before she died, or maybe 3 or 4 weeks before she died. I'm not sure the time anymore. But she told me she was going to get a gun because her life was being threatened, and she was scared for her life and for her family.
She woke up one morning in the New York newspaper. We couldn't find it. We don't know which one it was, but we do know it happened. There was a picture of Kerry. He was walking across, running across Central Park. And the picture was in the New York paper, and it scared her to death because she thought somebody was following Carrie. They were after her son.
After a picture appeared of Carrie in the paper, a large picture of him alone in the middle of Central Park, she was very worried that Carrie would be kidnapped. Obviously, she didn't allow that kind of picture to be taken and put in the paper of him all alone playing baseball, but he wasn't even playing baseball, he was just running across a field. It means that somebody was following him. Her life had been threatened, and we talked, and I said, the only new person in your life is Bo Pataki. Why don't you ask him if all this information that's slipping out about you is coming from him? She was concerned where the people were getting the information from.
On the evening of November 7th, 1965, Dorothy Kilgallen appeared on a live broadcast of What's My Line.
Miss Dorothy Kilgallen. Well, 6 down and 40 go, Mr. Sir.
Mrs. Stone, is there anything dangerous about the product that you make?
Yes.
Might it be considered some form of firearms?
No, we couldn't call it firearms, Ben. It's 7 down and 3 to go, but congratulations, Miss Kilgallen.
However, Mrs. Stone, would it do a lot of damage and make a lot of noise?
It could.
Yes, sir. Would it be in the dynamite family?
Yeah, it would be in the dynamite family.
Is it dynamite?
Yeah, that's dynamite. That's what we were talking about here, that dynamite.
I don't know anybody else in the dynamite family.
What do you think Mrs. Stone does with dynamite?
I think that Mrs. Stone sells dynamite.
You're absolutely right.
That's when they told us that the hotel, they would send us over if we wanted, to go to the hotel, and they'd send us over in a limousine. When we got there, this man was sitting next to her. They were really close, and I could see they both had a drink. It wasn't any laugh or, like people joking or this and that and other. They were talking. And the reason I know this is for the fact that I kept an eye on her, and because I wanted to talk to her afterwards to tell her, that I enjoyed being there and happy that she guessed my line, so on and so forth. This is where she was. Definitely in that corner right there.
And the man was sitting
right next to her.
Right next to her.
And I mean close, because they were talking, where they didn't want anybody else to hear or what, or, I will do about anything to talk to people or anything. Back, I had a lot of guts back when I was younger, but I knew they were talking business, serious business of some kind, I had that feeling.
I did her hair before the show, and she told me to come the next morning before 9. I arrived at the house at 9, used my key. I think it was about 8:30, 8:45. Used my key, let myself in, went upstairs. The light was on, and she wasn't there. So I turned on my curling irons, and I walked into the bedroom, not thinking that she would be there. And she was sitting up in bed, and I walked over to the bed and touched her, and I knew she was dead right away. She was dressed very peculiarly. She was dressed like I've never seen her before. She always dressed in pajamas and old socks, and her makeup was off and her hair was off and everything was done. She was completely dressed like she was going out. The hair was in place, the makeup was on, the false eyelashes were on, a book laid out on the bed, a drink on the table, the light was on, the air conditioning was on. Though you didn't need an air conditioner, you would have had the heat on. And she was always cold. And why she had the air conditioning on, I don't know.
Possibly someone else had turned it on.
Well, maybe to keep the body at a certain temperature. I went back in the dressing room, picked up the intercom, and rang for James. And I said, James, I am unable to wake Miss Kilgallen. Could you please come up? He ran up the stairs. I could hear him. He came up the front stairs. And James came in, and he was very flustered. He wasn't himself at all. And I was very upset, so I turned to him and I said, I'm going home. You can reach me there if you want to. And I left the building, and when I got downstairs and went out the front door, there was a police car sitting in front of the house. There were 2 officers in it. They didn't pay any attention to me when I came out.
Do you find it strange that these police officers did not approach you?
I found it very strange that they were sitting there dead in front of the house, and Dorothy was dead upstairs. Yes, I find it very strange.
Mark called me on the phone and told me that he had found her dead. And when he said to me, he said, when I tell you the bed she was found in and how I found her, he said, you're going to know she was murdered. And when he told me, I knew. It was just abnormal. The woman didn't sleep in that bed, much less the room. That was Richard's bed. That's the one he set fire to. It wasn't her bed.
Kilgallen's death was quickly ruled an accidental overdose by a combination of alcohol and barbiturates. No police investigation ever took place.
Eyelashes, makeup, hairpiece on, clothes she never wore to bed, not in the bedroom she ever slept in, book upside down, no reading glasses, no nothing. That sound like a staged death scene to you? No investigation. Despite that, they took one look at an empty Seconal bottle and decided, for whatever reason, the ME office at that time was controlled by the mafia, by the way, that's in both books. Close the case up, be done with it. That's what they did, no investigation. And then I was able to find a witness on the East Coast whose father was with the medical examiner's office, who said that 3 years after Dorothy died, a toxicologist there had kept some of her bodily fluids, hoping the technology would help them analyze those specimens, and they found 3 barbiturates in her stomach. They also found a glass that had residue of phenobarbital on it, which meant that it looked like that they had poured, whoever decided to do away with Dorothy, that powder into that particular drink.
She gave hints that something was coming up, that she had stumbled on to something. She had notes and notes and notes about it, which after her death disappeared.
The file was supposedly very thick. It was suspected that it was either stolen or her husband had it and may have destroyed it. Her husband, Richard Colmar, the actor-producer, was asked what was in Dorothy's file. He said, "I'm afraid that's a secret that will have to go to the grave with me."
I was able to find the daughter of Dorothy's butler, James Clement. She said that FBI agents swarmed Dorothy's townhouse the morning that she died and took all of her documents.
Although there were several people who may have had a motive to kill Dorothy Kilgallen, many of her friends believed her new love interest, Ron Pataki, had something to do with her death.
I think he was the snitch, that she was telling him so much, and I think that that's what she found out. She was going to confront him, I know she was, if he was the leak about her things that she had found out. I don't think he did the actual work, but I'm sure that whoever his employers were, did.
So I was able to find on Ron's website this poem, Vodka Roulette, seen as relief possibility. While I'm spilling my guts, she's driving me nuts, please fetch us 2 drinks on the run. Just skip all the noise and make one of them poison, and don't even tell me which one. Those are facts only the killer could know. He didn't know anything about there wasn't anything publicized about how Dorothy had died.
Pataki admitted to having a close friendship with Kilgallen and even helping on some of her articles about the JFK assassination. He publicly denied being with her on the night of her death, but 2 of his cousins told researchers that they knew for a fact he was. Pataki told another researcher that he had attended an assassin's school in Panama in 1954. Some researchers believe Pataki was working for the CIA, or perhaps the FBI. He once bragged in an interview about having mafia connections. Ron Pataki died in 2022 at the age of 86. However, he was not the only person suspected of murdering Kilgallen. Her husband, Richard Colmar, also fell under suspicion.
A news photograph showing Dorothy's mother with her husband, Richard.
Well, they had a big fight right about here, and it was in the paper and a picture of it. She's pointing a finger at Richard. She said, "You killed my daughter, and I will prove it." And James Kilgallen took her away.
58 years later, Dorothy Kilgallen's friends and loved ones are left to speculate about the many unanswered questions surrounding her death. Why did the New York police never do a thorough investigation to rule out the possibility of homicide? Why did police lie to the press about the time the body was discovered?
They didn't report Dorothy's death until the afternoon. Then they said that her body was discovered around noon. How is that so when I'm at the house between 8:30 and 9? How is that so?
Why was Kilgallen found in the wrong room, wrong bed, fully dressed, and holding a book without her reading glasses? Why was the air conditioner running on a cold November night in New York? What happened to Kilgallen's folder of research on Jack Ruby and the JFK assassination? What did Jack Ruby tell Kilgallen in their interview? What happened in New Orleans that frightened Dorothy Kilgallen? Why didn't the FBI or the Warren Commission investigate Ruby and Oswald's connections to Carlos Marcello?
On November 22, 1963, Carlos Marcello learned of his acquittal in a deportation case, while the nation learned the grisly fate of their president. The assassination happened in Dallas, Marcello's territory. With the arrest of suspect Lee Harvey Oswald, people from New Orleans came under scrutiny in the frenzied days that followed.
Lee Harvey Oswald had lifelong family ties to Carlos Marcello's organization. He had an uncle who had become a bookmaker in the Marcello organization.
When Oswald was arrested for disturbing the peace in New Orleans, he was sprung from jail by a man who had close connections to the Marcello organization.
Who's Jack Ruby? The Warren Commission concluded that he had no significant organized crime connections. The magic word is significant there. The women that he had in the strip club in Dallas were on a circuit that included the show bar in New Orleans, which is Carlos Marcello.
Whatever the supposed connections, information about Marcello and the Mafia was absent from the Warren Commission's investigation.
The FBI never gave him the electronic surveillance that indicated the mob thought about killing Kennedy.
The mob escaped any connection to the assassination, and grief-stricken Bobby Kennedy's efforts against organized crime disintegrated.
Was the death of Dorothy Kilgallen indeed a peculiar accident with some sort of innocent explanation? Was she killed by a jealous husband? Or was her death the result of a sinister plot to suppress her investigation into Jack Ruby and the Kennedy assassination? What do you think? Follow the links in the description and decide for yourself. Please leave your thoughts in the comments.